Imagine not being able to read the paper because your hands were shaking. Imagine not being able to read newsprint as your world faded to black. The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. With your host, Lee Martin, and co-host, Florence Myers McSwine.
Welcome to this week's National Federation of the Blind Newsline, Indiana. I'm your co-host, Florence Myers McSwine, here with your host, Mr. Lee Martin. And Lee, how are you doing today?
I'm doing just fine, and what a great afternoon it is here in Indianapolis. And we have a great guest that I'm looking forward to sharing with our viewing and listening audience today, and Mr. Carlos Taylor. And we're going to learn more about him as we proceed. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about the National Federation of the Blind Free Service, which is NFB Newsline. It's a program that's for the blind, visually impaired, and print challenged individuals, even those with certain forms of dyslexia, where you can have free access to over 500 different publications. And that's inclusive of world newspapers, also local publications, and national publications, and magazines. There's so much to learn about this service, and it's a free service. Once again, I want to emphasize that it is free, and it allows us, individuals that are print challenged, like ourselves on this show today, to use and access information. So, Mr. Carlos Taylor, tell us about the value of the service to you.
Hello, Lee, and thank you for having me. Yes, NFB Newsline is a very valuable service. I am blind myself, and I use it to read local and national news articles. It's been a great tool to have to be able to keep up to date as to what's going on, especially in the local community. And I find myself, when I'm gathered with friends and what have you, and current events come up, I feel like I can add valuable contributions to the conversation because I'm informed through NFB Newsline. So it's a very valuable service. Whoever's eligible to sign up, you might as well, since it's free. Doesn't hurt since it's a free service. But no, it's a very valuable tool. Even if there was a fee, I would pay for it because it's just important to be an informed citizen. So I really, really appreciate the service.
And Florence, you want to share a little bit about the magazines? We have 91 of them now. Can you believe it? And they're growing.
Yes, sir. 91. I certainly will. Lee, I love reading the magazines. Everyone who looks at the show that knows that I love the magazines. I read the newspapers, but I particularly love the magazines. And there is a magazine for everyone. Now I access the service using my iPhone. There's an app that I use. There's another addition to NFB Newsline. We have updated NFB Newsline. We now have KNFB Reader Basic on there. And it is very helpful, a very useful tool that I really, really enjoy using. And we also can access it through the A-Lady, as I like to call her, the digital player from the Talking Book and Braille Library, the computer, as well as the Victor Reader Stream. And so again, for those who need to read and don't have access to print, get it in NFB Newsline. You're gonna love it.
Yes, and I want to reiterate there a little bit about the new app that we have with the 3.0 basic KNFB reader. That is such a great tool, and for to have it in your hands and have access to it for free. With that, you can just take a photo of a document, a piece of mail, a bill, whatever you need to read, and instantly it will read that to you. That is for free. And I tell you, it used to cost, and it used to cost an arm and a leg, but it's free with NFB Newsline. So check that out. And we're going to take a short pause, and we'll be right back with our guest, Mr. Carlos Taylor. Stay tuned.
Thousands of Indiana residents feel isolated from the world due to vision problems. Thanks to the National Federation of the Blind, visually impaired Hoosiers can hear newspapers, circulars, and magazines from across the globe.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. I'm blind. I read Stars and Stripes on NFB Newsline.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline.
We are the nation's blind, and we read NFB Newsline.
As I travel the nation, I read NFB Newsline.
I live in Valparaiso, Indiana, and I listen to my local news on NFB Newsline.
As a student, I enjoy reading current events on NFB Newsline.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline today. Welcome to the National Federation of the Blind Newsline Indiana show. And we have our guest, Mr. Carlos Taylor. Carlos, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Lee. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Okay, Carlos, there's so much to learn about you and your profession and your life as a whole. So we're going to start talking about that. So Florence, let's go dive into that.
Certainly will. And Carlos, again, welcome to the show. And tell us a little bit about you. Are you from the Indianapolis area?
Thank you, Florence. So I currently live in Muncie, Indiana, which is about an hour or so drive from Indianapolis, I guess, depending on where, from where in Indianapolis you're traveling from, but roughly about an hour away. So that's where I currently live.
Okay.
Now that's my hometown, Carlos. I didn't know if you knew that or not, but I was born and raised there in the Muncie area.
So you're quite familiar.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
And small town guy in a big town world.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me something. Have you always been blind?
No. So I became blind around the age of 6 due to detached retinas. It occurred first in my left eye. And then roughly a year later, I had a detached retina in my right eye as well. I had surgery to correct the detachment. It was successful for a short time, and then scar tissue formed, and there was nothing else the doctors could do at that time. So I grew up in South Bend, Indiana, and so I had a good doctor there who did the initial surgeries, and then later we were referred to a specialist in Memphis, Tennessee, where I had some other surgeries. But all in all, the surgeries weren't successful long term, just short term.
Now, were you educated in school for the blind, or did you attend public school?
Great question, Florence. So before I lost my vision, I started preschool, kindergarten, and a little bit of first grade. When at the time I was attending a private school in South Bend, and then once I started losing vision, that school didn't have any resources or services for me as a child who was blind. And so my parents were faced with a decision of either sending me to Indianapolis to the School for the Blind or to local school. And just to give you a time reference here, we're talking 1986-ish, 1980, about 1985, 1986, that time frame. So public school was an option for me, and that's what happened. So I began attending public school in South Bend, where I was in a classroom, with a teacher of the visually impaired who taught me to read Braille. And then I received, orientation and mobility training, and what have you.
So that transition, like you said, it happened at a very early age. So how did that impact your life as growing up as a child, and what activities? Because I know there's parents that may be listening, or maybe a child that's listening, and want to see just how did Carlos and his family handle that.
Lee, that's a great question. So, everybody at first was, of course, it's a big change, and looking back at it, especially now that I'm an adult and looking back at it, and trying to see from my parents' perspective, it was a uncertain time. You just don't know. Nobody else in my family was blind. Didn't know anybody else who was blind, so just didn't know. But my parents and family are all supportive. From the time, I was in the hospital having surgeries, people, stopping by to visit or calling just to check in on us, see how we're doing, and visiting at home. And then once I, became blind, and there was nothing else that could be done, going to the public school, and there were actually a few other blind children in the school. So I think that was helpful. And then I had really, really good teachers, very supportive, like I mentioned, teaching me Braille, orientation and mobility, and my O&M instructor would talk to my parents about things that I could do, that I would be able to do with additional practice and growing my skill set. And so all these things I think added up along the way, to actually, I had a very, when I look back at my childhood, I look back at it very fondly and in a positive light. I had friends from church and from school, and in my neighborhood, who knew me before I was blind, and even, after I was blind. So those things, there was a time when, after a surgery, I had to be real cautious. I couldn't, bump my head and all these things, couldn't, get on rides at the fair that would jerk you around, and things like that. I had to be very cautious at first. So I think, my grandparents were very cautious with me in that sense. But after a time when that was no longer an issue, I went back to, playing with my friends and my cousins. I have a cousin who's a little older than me who would, wrestle around and play, So, yeah. So, the family was family and friends of the family, who essentially are family, in our view, in my family, were very supportive. I know that was a long answer. I hope that gives you.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, I hope that gives you some insight.
It really does. And it's such a long and great answer that we're going to take a short pause for the calls, and we're going to come back and we're going to get some more of this long and great story and journey of Carlos Taylor. Stay tuned.
If you or someone you know is visually impaired or print challenged, the National Federation of the Blind has a resource you need.
I use NFB Newsline when reading Hammond Northwest Times.
Using NFB Newsline, I read the Christian Science magazine.
Dad, you read Jerusalem Post too.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Live the life you want. Read NFB Newsline.
It's free.
I just graduated college as a blind student. How can I independently find job listings?
Thanks to the National Federation of the Blind, visually impaired Hoosiers can hear newspapers, circulars, and magazines from across the globe.
It is a fantastic service.
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
We are the nation's blind, and we read NFB Newsline.
Welcome back to this segment of the National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. And we're speaking to our guest, Mr. Carlos Taylor. And Carlos, I'm going to ask you a question that a lot of times people ask children when they're growing up, and I know you're not a child, but what ambitions did you have growing up?
Florence, that's a great question. I always knew, even from an early age, that I wanted to grow up and have a job and live independently, although I didn't know what that actually meant at the time. I always knew I wanted to grow up and get a job. My parents, I grew up in a household where both my mom and dad worked. Aunts and uncles worked. Nobody comes to my mind who didn't work other than my grandparents who were retired. Actually, my grandmother in South Bend, she did work. I always had this, I guess, just due to my family, I always had it in my mind that I would grow up and work for a living. So that, and plus older cousins, a lot of my cousins in my family are older than I am. So I saw a lot of cousins leave home and go off to college. And then, after they graduated from college, move away and get jobs. So I kind of just thought of myself in the same light.
So, Carlos, it seems as though anyone can tell that you have a high degree of intellect here, and education has always been, at your doorstep, and you seem to have achieved quite a bit in this short time of life. So you want to talk about uh, the challenges that you faced as a student and how you overcame that to become a technology specialist at Ball State University.
Right. So, I went to public school and learned Braille, learned how to use a Perkins Braille writer for anybody who might know what those are. Mechanical Braille devices. Some might compare them to like a typewriter. I mean, you put paper in and it's putting Braille physically on a page as you're pressing keys. It's not computerized. So at least the ones I used weren't computerized. So I used a Perkins Brailler, material, books and things in Braille, but there are certain challenges, definitely. Math, math in general, I didn't mind, but when you got into, especially in high school for me, when I got into geometry and things, it's very visual. So having the tools that my teacher had, the visually impaired, had tools to make diagrams accessible for me in a tactile form. And so that was a blessing. I don't know what I would have done without those to get through some of those challenging math courses. And then even into college, I attended Ball State for my bachelor's degree in business information technology. And for anyone who's blind, who uses screen reading technology, you may know that as wonderful as the technology is, not everything is as accessible as we would like for them to be. So, in the late 90s and early 2000s, when I'm in undergraduate school, when it came to math courses in college or some computer courses where they wanted you to do some activities in a book and it's showing you illustrations, I made use of readers, people who could see, who would accompany me and read the information I needed them to read. And then I would, do what I needed to do and get through the course the best way I could. So there's a mixture of, before computers, I know people who went to college made extensive use of readers. So my college education especially was a bit of a hybrid in a sense, in that, I used computer technology, digital technology when possible, but then when challenges presented themselves, I used readers to gain access to the information.
Okay, so let's see here. So with Ball State University, there's so much that you've done there at Ball State University, because when I first met you, you were in Division of Student Services.
So actually, yeah. So my job title at the time was Adaptive Computer Technology Specialist, and what I did was I provided accessible technology solutions to students, faculty, and staff with disabilities. And so my job, even though I worked very closely with disability services, my job was actually placed in information technology.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so currently, you know, share what you do with Eskenazi.
Sure. So about a year and a half ago, I began working at Eskenazi Health in Indianapolis. As previously mentioned, my role is the program manager of the Gregory S. Fairbach Center. And what we do at the Gregory S. Fairbach Center is we provide internship opportunities to students, college students in the state of Indiana with what we call physical disabilities, meaning visual, hearing, and mobility impairments. So those are the students who we target for internship opportunities within the Eskenazi Health System and with our employer partners. We have several partners who are great supporters of our program, including Eli Lilly, Cummins, Chase Bank, Old National Bank, and several. Just those are just a few. Indianapolis Children's Museum, but just to name a few. So we have a great list of supporters who also take interns from our program. So it's been really great. I really enjoy my new role.
Now, who actually takes care of the accommodation tools that might be necessary for those interns?
Your question, who takes care of the accommodations? So that's what we do at the Gregory S. Fairbach Center. So for anybody who doesn't live in the Indianapolis area, we provide accessible housing accommodations. We provide housing at the IUPUI Riverwalk Apartments, which are right across the street from the Eskenazi Hospital. Accessible transportation for anybody who's going to another Eskenazi location in town or to one of our employer partners, and also those accommodations, screen reader, magnification software, if we need a larger monitor or what have you, the Gregory S. Fairbach Center, we're able to provide those accommodations if necessary.
Wow, that is such a great question and answer there. So we're going to take a short break and we're going to come back with the conclusion of our show. And Mr. Carlos will be right back. So stay tuned.
The National Federation of the Blind knows that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future. Every day we raise the expectations of blind people because low expectations create obstacles between blind people and our dreams. You can live the life you want. Blindness is not what holds you back.
With my failing eyesight, I'm not able to read regular newspapers, and I'm not able to keep up with obituaries.
I've been a homemaker all of my life, but since my vision has failed, I wish I could read my favorite magazines.
Have you heard of the NFB Newsline?
Learn more by calling 855-963-6476 or visit nfbnewsline-in.org.
Subscribe free to NFB Newsline today.
Welcome back to the conclusion of our show. And Carlos, if one were interested in an internship at Eskenazi, how might I get more information?
Great question. Please send me an email. My email address is Carlos, CARLOS .Taylor, TAYLOR at Eskenazi Health, and that's spelled ESKENAZI Health, HEALTH .edu. So carlos.taylor@eskenazihealth.edu. And I'll be happy to share more information with you.
And Carlos, we just want to thank you once again for coming on to our show and sharing so much information. We'll have to have you come back and share with us even more exclusively. With unemployment rate being what it is throughout the country for those with disabilities, and particularly those with disabilities of color, I mean, it really skyrockets, and it's really it really is something that we all need to take a look at.
It is. It is.
So would you like to leave us with a word of encouragement?
Absolutely, Lee. Thank you again for having me on the show today. One thing I'd like to leave with the audience is no matter what challenges life presents to you, just keep looking to the stars and keep reaching for your goals.
I'm going to leave you with the National Federation of the Blind's 30-second brand. The National Federation of the Blind knows that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future. Every day we raise the expectations of blind people because low expectations create obstacles between blind people and our dreams. You can live the life you want. Blindness is not what holds you back. So on that note, have a great week.
The National Federation of the Blind, Newsline, Indiana. For more information, go to nfb-in.org or call 855-963-6476. That's 855-963-6476. The National Federation of the Blind encourages you to live the life you want.